Hi, my name is Süsslin, and I will now present to you Designing Safer Touch Displays, a work by me, Ville Mäkelä from University of Waterloo, Florian from LMU Munich, and Hirsch from UC Santa Cruz. So all of you might know this scenario. You line up in front of some ticketing machine in the public, and some person in front of you is blowing their nose, and after some time it is their turn to use it, and you just know they have not disinfected their hands. And especially during the COVID pandemic, this was behavior that no one really liked, and it can get really bad, as London Metropolitan University has reported, who found traces of feces on popular restaurant touchscreens, in this case McDonald's, and pretty much on all of them. So this can get pretty bad. So this leads us to the large scale problem that we looked into, which is if we have public touch displays and we want higher hygiene, how can we solve it? And academia has looked into it with hardware solutions like self-sanitizing surfaces and non-touch solutions like mid-air gestures, remote control, speech, gaze, and elbow input, and also software-based solutions like showing previous users' touches in form of fingerprints. But, and that is what our solution, Adaptive UI, looks into, people prefer touch for familiarity, precision, and cost-effectiveness. They have faced trouble with non-touch alternatives, which creates accessibility barriers, and past software approaches only showed contamination but did not prevent repeated touching. So our approach really wants to change layouts between users to digitally distribute physical touch. So our research questions are: how can we reduce the perceived touch overlaps on shared displays through digital interface adaptations, and how do the interface adaptations impact the perceived usability? And that's our concept, GUI rearrangement, which comes from academia, which is basically taking some user interface and the user's touches and then doing some magic and getting out a user interface that is optimized for hygiene. And the expectation is then that different users tap buttons in different places, and that should reduce touch overlap and probably also hygiene. That is the idea. And we came up with 3 concrete ideas how to do it. The raindrop strategy is the first one, which is basically dynamically adjusting user interface layouts after each tab of a user. It calculates a oval shaped fingertip contact area basically, and then shifts UI elements outward with some sort of shifting factor. The second idea is rule-based rearrangement, which groups UI elements into logical clusters and then rearranges these entire groups by swapping or resizing them, but not single elements, which is inspired by, say, responsive web design. You all know it maybe. Then atomic design methodology can also be used, which is larger structures made of smaller components, also very common, which allows very flexible UI adaptations. And the priority-based idea is basically having a grid-based user interface approach like a material design, and organizing interface elements into this grid. And then each grid cell gets a priority, and each user interface element gets a priority. 2 different kinds of priority levels there. And then, let's say you have the F pattern in terms of how important which space on the screen is. You can then recalculate where an interface element might be positioned. And in order to evaluate which of these strategies is maybe pretty good to take it into a study with users, we consulted expert interviews in 30 to 40 minute interviews, one-on-one, through video, and remotely with a call-up whiteboard, which showed a public touch scenario, a metro ticketing system like in the beginning scenario, and a simplified user interface of it, as you can see here on the right-hand side. And the goal was to brainstorm further touch overlap reduction strategies, but also collect feedback on our ideas. And the focus was on usability, on limitations, alignment with common heuristics. And well, the participants were 4 experts with extensive HCI experience, 8 to 20 years, and expertise in public displays and adaptive UI. And the preferred strategy that came out was the rule-based one, because it maintains element relationships, maintains recognizability, is easy to implement in existing UIs, is less effort than priority-based, which, well, is pretty complicated with the 2 priorities that you need to balance, and might not leave excessive white space like a raindrop would. When you shift all the time, it might result in excessive white space. So there is a clear implementation like through responsive web design. So the study design that we came up with to look into rule-based rearrangement and how effective it is for our research questions is, well, an exploratory within subjects mixed methods lab study with 26 participants that has a snack and drink machine user interface deployed on an Acer touch-enabled display and 6 different experimental conditions. Our 26 participants consisted of 14 men, 10 women, and 2 non-binary, genderqueer, diverse people, pretty young, 19 to 32 years of age, so the median was 25. Most of them university students, 21 out of 26, and all were familiar with public displays and touch interaction, and even used them very frequently, 14 out of 26 within the last week when the study occurred. Our study design has the following independent variables, namely the layout condition, which is a baseline user interface, and then 2 statically but rearranged versions of it that will basically simulate that rearrangement process, but in a controlled way. And then traces condition, which builds on previous research, so basically showing contaminated areas. So we have the traces condition with traces and without traces. And then the dependent variables, which is the average task completion time, and the perceived usability score, which is built on the hedonic TAM, is usually 7-point Likert scale. So, and the study design procedure is the following. We start off with some pre-study questionnaire, demographics, and so on. Then we have a practice round with the baseline interface and without traces. And from now on, we always have the same set of purchasing tasks with the snack and drink machine. After the practice round, they do an actual round with one of the conditions, then an interim questionnaire on the usability for this condition they just experienced. Then the question is, have they done all of them? If not, we repeat until all of them have been done. And then if we're through, there's a final questionnaire to express preferences and qualitative feedback. And this is how the baseline layout was created, which is the control condition, well, some snack and drink machine, as I've said, inspired by McDonald's kiosks. We tried to look into what is very common, and we looked into common usability heuristics to create a minimalist design, high contrast, clear buttons, and focus on accessibility too, and implemented it with React.js and a model view controller architecture. And then we created those versions of it. Here's the baseline, and then here as you can see, we flipped the sidebar. We even flipped internals, which I said that could be done. And here too in the content area with the amount control buttons. And you can even do it, here you can see it vertically, so it becomes a footer. So we have some resizing there too, but you know that from responsive web design. Exactly, so same here for the amount controls. And the key findings were that, well, for rearranged layouts, those helped reducing perceived touch overlap by distributing touch, and participants adapted to a visible touch trace, so not the rearrangement, but the touch traces, by avoiding crowded areas using their knuckles. So when they saw it, they used their knuckles. And the quality finding is that making traces optional would balance hygiene perception and comfort, because they did say that it was very odd to get used to it in the beginning. But yeah, that will be interesting in the key findings for research question 2 and the perceived usability. The baseline was faster to use, so here you can really see it. It was better than both other variants, significantly over 2 seconds faster than the other 2 ones. And with the touch traces, the same thing, nearly 3 seconds, and also significantly in the difference. Then the learning effect was expressed qualitatively. That is what I meant. So over time, people thought they get used to it. The baseline also in the usability score was higher, significantly in the terms of the horizontal rearranged interface, but not in terms of vertical. So there seems to be some space to create these alternate variants, that they don't all come equal. But traces do reduce the usability score significantly. People adjusted their behavior, as mentioned. Right-handed users often repositioned their arm. Other findings were rearrangement helped participants avoid commonly touched spots, and that supported in the perceived hygiene. But for others, that was not clear if it really did something medically speaking. Touch traces did help avoid certain touched areas, but had mixed feelings. People partially felt disgusted by it, so optional would be good. Another aspect that came up was privacy. Rearrangement was thought to maybe help make it harder for onlookers to reconstruct inputs when they observe them. Touch traces, however, did have the converse effect, so they would reveal input. Implications would be that touch traces should be optional and temporary to avoid frustration, and they can be used, however, to lead users to cleaner areas. Rearranging layouts can be used to distribute touchpoints and help with hygiene from software side, but users need time to adapt it, so you need to have a learning curve in mind. And the design should accommodate for handedness and familiarity with interface conventions. Academically speaking, we should look into the behavior and cognitive load effect, and we should look into the learning effects of rearrangement and the usability trade-off, because people thought it might help with hygiene and it would be a good trade-off. So the conclusion is, and the core finding, that rearrangement and touch traces alter touch patterns and thus also the perceived hygiene benefit, but at the cost of usability. So what's next? We should look through a field study into the long-term effect in broader demographics that way too, and maybe use rearrangement against shoulder surfing and measure infection risk reduction empirically, if it's really true. And generally speaking, maybe look into context-specific interface optimizations for public displays. So let's explore hygiene as a UI optimization objective. Thank you so much.